Bethany Powell Gray, has some slides. So she'll show some slides, but it'll mostly be kind of conversation based. So just a bit of administration to get started. My name is Erin McConnell, and I am one of the co-hosts of the OTS webinar series. We have our other co-host here. Ronald, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi all, my name is Ronald Buijsen and I'm a postdoc at the Leiden University Medical Center, and I'm sharing these sessions together with Erin.
Great. So the way that the session will work is I will introduce our speaker. We will take questions from the chat and from the Q&A function, whichever you prefer, and we will keep the discussion going that way. So without further ado, we have our guest speaker today, who is Professor Bethany Powell Gray. She's an assistant professor of pharmacology and molecular sciences at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Professor Powell Gray received her BS at Abilene Christian University, is that how it's said? In Texas. Abilene, okay, in Texas in 2005. And then her PhD at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in 2012. So Professor Powell Gray then worked as a postdoc with Bruce Selinger at Duke University, where her research interests focused on using aptamers for targeted delivery and imaging, among other applications. Professor Powell Gray has recently transitioned to the role of assistant professor, and she has graciously agreed to have a conversation with us about the process. So maybe to get things started, Professor Gray, you can maybe give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and kind of your journey into the position you're in now.
Okay, yeah, so I think you just did a really nice introduction. It has been, if you paid attention to the years you just mentioned, it has been 10 years since I finished my doctorate degree. So this is not, the title of this talk, postdoc to faculty, may have been a bit of a misnomer. I'm realizing later, because I did have some space in between. So I was a postdoc for 5 years, which is what most universities in the US cap the postdoc years at. And then I worked as a staff scientist for several years, also in Bruce Selinger's lab at Duke, and then transitioned to the faculty position. So it has been a long road, but a great one. So.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah, I know from being familiar with your work that you had been with Bruce Selinger for a while. And so I was kind of curious about how you had transitioned there. That's really interesting. I think that's also a lot of people don't necessarily know that there's this kind of like staff scientist position that exists in between, or like group leader type positions that exist in between postdoc to faculty. So that's really cool that you have experience.
Yeah, I think that time gives you, so for me, I had some personal life issues going on that drug things out a little bit, which life happens in different ways for all of us. And also, it gave me time to apply for my own funding. So that was something I was able to do, is to get my own grant where I was PI of the grant during that time. And that's just something that really helps when you're applying for a faculty position, is coming in as a very competitive applicant when you have R01 type funding. In my case, it wasn't an R01, it was a DoD grant, Department of Defense, US Department of Defense grant, but it's a similar level of funding. And so that can really help with your application. And so there's ways that you can get those types of grants, before you actually transition into a faculty position.
Yeah, that's really cool, because I know that, like you said, funding definitely gives an advantage in the process.
Yeah.
And so do you have any, just while you've mentioned it, do you have any kind of advice on how to position yourself so that you can work towards getting your own funding while you're still either a postdoc or you're working in one of these other types of positions?
Yeah, I think that just like you mentioned, starting in your postdoc years is a really good way to start. So I recommend, do apply for postdoc fellowships, try really hard to get a postdoc fellowship. That definitely makes it, having that on your resume, and that really helps with getting, securing initial funding afterwards. So I was lucky enough to get a postdoc fellowship, again, from the Department of Defense here, which funds a number of different disease types. And so that really helped me in transitioning to my own award afterwards. the more I think you have a track record of showing that you can get funding, that you can complete projects, get stuff from those projects, it just helps you get even more afterwards.
Cool. Okay, so I guess maybe let's go back to the beginning a little bit there. So can you tell us how you went about finding the advertisements for faculty positions, and especially the ones that you were interested in applying to?
Yes, that is a great question. Let me actually see if I can pull up a slide, because I made a slide with some stuff that I did for that. So I will make it big full screen. I'm having some computer issues, so bear with me. It's a little slower than usual. Can you guys see it? I'm trying
we
to.
can see your whole desktop.
There you see?
Right now. Okay, there.
See it? Okay. So here are some major places that I looked when I was looking for a, searching. So surprisingly, Google is amazing. And just Google in general. I'm sure we all Google so many things, but if you just Google like whatever type of job it is that your faculty position, it will be like jobs near you, and it will show you all of these jobs. And there were actually a number. I was kind of always shocked at like jobs I would see somewhere else that would also show up in Google, and then I could like find stuff on Google that I didn't know about. And so you can kind of like literally just general Google search, and then you can really it'll give you like near you, like Google's like, well, you live in this area, I'm going to show you the jobs here, but you can also, you can expand that range. So you can really play with the range and say, no, I want to look everywhere, or I want to look in this particular region. And Google is a search engine, so they pull up a lot of stuff. So other places I looked were, there are a number of online resources like the Chronicle of Higher Education. A lot of institutions will post here, or Higher Ed Jobs. A lot of institutions will post here. And then I really recommend as well journal websites. And so journal websites such as Science Careers here, or like Nature Careers, or other journals that you're following, that if they have a job website, those are really good places where institutions tend to publish when they have a position open. I would be creative about what type of position you search for. So, use broad language, use broad terminology, kind of think about which different boxes you can fit into. So like, I'm not quite sure if I'm a chemist or a biologist or a what am I. So like for myself, I applied for chemistry department jobs. I applied for biology department jobs. I applied for pharmacology department jobs, which is where I ended up. Just be creative about what you can call yourself and how you can really sell yourself to fit these different positions. And just don't, you might think, well, I'm not sure if I really fit this box, but it doesn't hurt to try, and you never know. You may fit the box more than you think you do. Or the department may just be so excited to have your application because that's actually what they want to hire, and they'll try to make you fit the box because they want you anyways.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's something that's especially poignant. I mean, obviously, I don't have experience outside of the oligonucleotide therapeutic field and kind of like adjacent field, but I think that's something especially important to state, because if you think of all of the professors who are kind of leaders in the field, they're all in different departments. They're not all fitting into chemistry or all fitting into bio or all. So I think that's really important to mention, to kind of look outside of
absolutely
wherever you were trained. Okay, so just a reminder, if you have any questions, to just put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. So can you tell us a little bit what it was like to put together a faculty application?
Yes. It's a lot of work. I'll go ahead and show you a few more slides now because it may be useful. Here are several different articles that I think are helpful for like what you should do when you're looking for faculty, jobs and trying to put together stuff. And I don't know that these are the particular articles I actually read because I went and looked these up again, but I read articles like this to help me figure out what should I be looking for, what should I be putting in my applications. And you can really tailor it to what type of application you're looking at, like articles like this that are like obtaining a faculty position in STEM at a research intensive institution, or like obtaining a faculty position at a primarily undergraduate institution. What do you need to do to tailor your application for those different types of jobs? Here's another one: strategies for obtaining a faculty position in the biomedical sciences, views from both sides of the job search process, that I find interesting and helpful. And then what I really used a lot when I was putting together my application were these resources. So actually, I didn't use Future PI Slack. This is a thing you guys may have heard of. I didn't know about it, but I've since heard it's amazing. So this is a Slack channel where people say that Future, like if you want to be a PI, people go into Future PI Slack and they just get a lot of peer support for other postdocs who are wanting to be in academics, and apparently it's amazing. So I plug for that, even though I haven't tried it, and I can't now. So, and then I actually used a lot the UCSF Office of Career and Professional Development website, which is here's their website here. I obviously was never at UCSF, but they have an amazing website and it has amazing resources, and they show like example research statements, example teaching statements, and that's like, I had never read those before because I had never been on a search committee for these things. And so for me, it's always helpful to have an example and to be able to build off of those examples. And so what I really did was use their website a lot and then just like Google example this, example that, and just try to read a bunch of like example research statements, a bunch of example teaching statements, and try to think about, okay, what should I put in my own? And the most important thing I can say is really just to tailor your application. So it is so important that you tailor your application to that particular job. And it sounds really complicated. It is a lot of work applying for these jobs, but it's worth it to tailor it, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. So for like my applications, I applied to a lot of jobs. I in my cover letter, I just have like 2 or 3 sentences that I would switch out and tailor for each institution. So it's not that much of the cover letter. It's just a few sentences of the cover letter that you're switching to make it, to sell yourself as a good fit for that particular institution or department. And then the same with the teaching statement. So like, depending on what type of institution I'm applying to, I would just tailor a little bit of my teaching statement, right? So if it's an institution where it's primarily teaching, like primarily undergrads and teaching, then you're kind of emphasizing that in the teaching statement. If it's an institution where it's more research, you're emphasizing that you like to teach, but you really like teaching in the lab. And you're kind of tailoring. So I would just kind of have a general, like, here's my teaching statement for primary undergrad institution, here's my teaching statement for research institution, and just kind of pick from them. So just really making it clear that you are actually interested in that particular job. I think any search committee is kind of turned off if they just see a generic application that doesn't seem like you're actually interested in them. They want you to be really interested in them. So.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think definitely one of the most common kind of feedbacks or generalized feedbacks that I've seen as well is to make sure you tailor it to the institution and it's not a generic application. I'm wondering, having given us already tons of great advice, if you had received any advice while you were putting together your packages that kind of like really stuck with you or that you thought was helpful. Maybe you've already mentioned it though, when you did give us a ton of kind of.
Yeah, I think the tailoring your application part is really helpful. I think some maybe a piece of advice that wasn't so helpful that then I tailored was so some advice I heard when I was doing listening to a seminar like this was to not like to, well, let me rephrase this. They were trying to be helpful, but I think I'm going to modify the advice to make it helpful because it actually hurt me with some at least an interview or two. So the advice I got was don't go in assuming that anybody wants to collaborate with you. So then I was like in a few interviews very hesitant to suggest that I would want to collaborate with somebody because I was told don't assume that, like don't have that advice, don't do that. But actually they want to hear that. So my advice on that front is absolutely, like before you interview, look at what everyone there is doing as much as you can. You're not going to know everything they're doing, but kind of try to get a general idea of what people are doing and have an idea of how ways you could collaborate, but don't assume that they would want to collaborate. And so the way, after I saw how that went off in a few interviews where I was like, oh, I don't, like they don't, I'm not supposed to want to collaborate with them because that's what I was told before my advice. In later interviews, what I would say is, yeah, that would be great. Like I could see myself collaborating in this way, but I don't want to assume that anyone would want to collaborate with me. So if they want to collaborate, here's some ways that I would collaborate, just to make it clear that I'm not going to come in and like push myself on other people, but here's ways I could collaborate.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think definitely from what I've heard also, it's a fine balance between showing that you can be an independent researcher and showing that you're definitely an asset to the team as a department to be able to collaborate and work
Absolutely.
together.
Yes, everybody wants somebody who's going to be a good colleague, right? They're hiring the other PIs are hiring a colleague for themselves. So they want someone that they're going to be happy being with and spending time with. And I can certainly tell you, having listened a little bit to things on the other side of the table now, even though I haven't been in this position that long, people are not going to be excited if it's somebody that they don't think will play well with others. So
Fair.
yeah,
That's good insights. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I'm not sure whether you have experience both during the pandemic and outside of the pandemic applying for different positions, but can you speak to what it was like for you applying during the pandemic, now that people are still kind of in this virtual world in between, like there's some on-site interviews, some are still virtual, this sort of situation. What was that like for you?
yeah. I will say it was really not a great time. It was a terrible time to be applying. And I am hoping that things are improving. When I was putting out applications, the number of job spots, the number of available opportunities was very, very low. Much, much lower than normal, because a lot of universities lost money during COVID and kind of put a hold on any hiring that they had planned on doing. So it made it a lot more challenging. I really hope I'm hoping that corner is turning and it will not be, yes, fingers crossed that will not be the case moving forward. It also made it really confusing time-wise. So usually you can kind of predict when jobs are going to be posted and when they're going to be starting to ask for like applications to be due and starting to be looking at stuff. When I was applying, they were all over the place. So, most of the times you can expect a job to be posted in August or September, and like you should really try to get your application in early. But I was seeing jobs not posted till December or January, which never would have been that late, because it's because of when the university finally decided to like free up the funds again that had put on hold because of COVID. And so again, the timing, I'm hoping that has changed. I think we're probably past that, but just to be safe, I would suggest that if you're applying in these coming year or two, to really just kind of keep looking for job postings. Don't just look at what pops up in August and September, but do keep looking, because the timelines might be a little bit off still.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
In terms of interviewing, it is very different interviewing virtually, and it's a different feel. So I think we all have lots of practice with it now, but it can be a little bit more awkward, because sometimes you get that like awkward delay and you're like talking on top of each other, or stuff that wouldn't happen in person. So you just you have to be a little bit gracious and kind of laugh at yourself, and hope the person on the other end is as well. But also I thought, well, there's some parts of it that are kind of nice. Like you don't have that like awkward lunch where you're worried about having like lettuce in your teeth or something during the interview. So I was like, this is actually like the least stressful interview lunches I've ever had, because I'm getting to eat lunch at my desk, and I'm not like stressed about if I'm being polite or if I'm there's some upsides to it. So
that's so funny. It's funny because everyone who I know who's done interviews during the pandemic, they've all said that it's like been nice to not have to go to the meals, to just be able to like take an hour to breathe, and
it's like you finally get a breather. Yeah, like at the same time though, you don't get like the usual, like usually you'd be like walking to an office to another and you have like a quick chance for a bathroom break or something, so like you probably won't get as many bathroom breaks and stuff. So make sure don't be afraid to ask for things like that if you need them, if they haven't been virtually built into the interview. So yeah.
That's great. Okay, so I guess maybe we can chat a little bit about kind of each component of the application. So can you give us a little bit of insight about what it was like for you to put together your research proposal?
Yeah. Again, this is where those examples really, really helped me, and the ones that I highlighted earlier, looking at other examples and just really thinking through how to write it in a way that would make sense. I kind of just most examples, and what I chose to do was to focus on 3 projects. Here are 3 major projects that we'll start out on in my lab. But I definitely made the mistake, when I wrote initial drafts of my statement of making it more like a grant proposal. This should not be a grant proposal. I don't recommend that you make it a grant proposal. Make it a more general, more general than a grant proposal. Like, yes, you still want to talk about, here's the project and here's kind of how I would address it. But this, it needs to be a little more broadly appealing, I guess is how you would say it, and little more vague than a grant proposal will be. So I would suggest, having somebody else read it. So I had a few colleagues read it and they said, this is good, but it reads kind of like a grant proposal. So maybe you should, change a few things here. And that was really helpful for me. Because I think we're just so used to being grant writing mode that it was hard to get out of that for the proposal.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I wouldn't know how to not write it like a grant at this point, or a grant or a manuscript, like take your pick.
Right. And it's
Those
neither,
are my
right?
two options.
It's neither. Yeah. You're still trying to sell your research like you do in a grant proposal, but you don't have to sell it with, we're going to do this and this and this and this and this. Like, I'm interested in this and maybe we'll do this. It's a little like, ooh, or like, maybe this. So, yeah.
Do you find for the applications that there was kind of like various requirements in terms of one place wanted a 1-page statement, one place wanted a 10-page statement, how did you handle that sort of situation?
That was, I think the most time consuming portion, for me at least, the most time consuming portion of the application. So it was very easy, like I mentioned before, to tailor. Like my cover letter was just a few sentences that I changed for each place. Teaching statement, I kind of had my, like, here's the teaching statement for this type of institution, here's a teaching statement for this type of institution. The research statement, absolutely everybody was different. Some places had very little guidance, some places had very specific guidance, and it's just all over the board. And some places wanted separate prior research statements and separate from future research statements, and some places wanted them combined into one document. And yes, so I did all sorts of finagling for my research statements and very much made them specific to the positions. If there was a position that did not have clear, like a clear guidance as to a length of what because some places had like, we want a 10-page, that's pretty long. I only had a few of those. Some places had like we want a 10-page statement, which that's a lot of research statement for this type of application. If an institution did not specify page length, I tended to go with the average of what I saw. So if the average was 3 to 5 pages, then I went with 3 to 5 pages, if there were no specific guidelines. I think the challenge for me were the shorter ones where there was not a separate, where there wasn't a separate prior research from future research. Because you still kind of have to explain your prior research a little bit in order for your future research to make sense. And so that was I think what I found the most challenging is space-wise, figuring out how to succinctly describe my prior research in a way that made sense that I could then explain my future research and give sufficient space to the future research. So those statements are very important though. Your research statement is very important. So I spend a lot of time on it.
Great. You kind of touched on it, but I was curious about how you kind of started, or maybe your ongoing process of putting together either the teaching statement or a full teaching portfolio.
Yeah. So I had to be a little creative. Because I don't have teaching experience in the same way that maybe some of you do, or a lot of you may. So I went to a graduate school that was at a medical school, and it's only a med school and grad school, so there weren't any undergrads. So we didn't have any TAing or teaching there. Then I went to a medical school for my postdoc. So we didn't have any, I didn't have the same types of interactions with undergrads. So I just really had to be creative. I had sought out, because I knew that I wanted to do academia and that this was a week, just because of the institutions where the research was that I was doing happened to not have these opportunities. I had specifically sought out other types of opportunities. Like I had found a 1-month course I could teach as a postdoc. And I taught several things as an undergrad. I taught MCAT, which is like the test that people take to get into med school here in the US. I taught like a prep course for that. So I just really had to highlight those things, even though I did not have traditional, like I didn't teach General Chem 1 or General Biology 1 or TA or whatever, you know, other you may have and another opportunity. So I think you can just be really creative about how you highlight your teaching. Don't be afraid to be creative about how you highlight it. And, you know, also teaching the lab is a big part of teaching too. And so that was something I really incorporated, and I really highlighted when I was like focusing on an application for a primarily research intensive institution, was how much teaching I had done in the lab, how many students I had mentored in the lab, the success of the students I had mentored in the lab, what I had helped them get on to, you know, go on to do. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's
Okay.
also really important that you highlight or that you highlighted that you can take opportunities and experiences you had throughout your entire career. It doesn't have to just be like what you were doing in your postdoc, when you're applying. So no matter what stage you're at, you can be seeking out opportunities to be involved that can be applicable or translatable as skills on your applications.
Yes. So I started out my teaching statement by talking about how the first time I remember teaching is sitting at the lunch table in 7th grade, teaching all of my friends how to do the math homework, and that became like a regular thing. And I can't, like, multiple people commented on that during job interviews. Like, wow, that was such a great illustration and a great story. So like, it doesn't, yeah, I mean, obviously that wasn't the focus of the teaching statement, but don't be afraid to say stuff like, you know, unique things about your teaching.
Cool. I will take over from here. So thanks to everyone so far. So I'm just continuing a bit on the skills. So I think during your career you acquire all kind of skills. So not only teaching skills but also technical skills, leadership skills. So can you comment a bit on all these different kind of skills that you learn during your career? So for example, the leadership skills.
On how to put them in your application, or just on how they have been helpful in the transition?
Yeah, both.
Okay. Oh, that's a tricky question. So, you know, I will say there were times when I just felt really, really behind. Like, here I am, you know, 9 years past my PhD defense, and I'm finally looking for that faculty job, trying to get that faculty job. Like, man, I'm just behind in life. But I don't think it's that way at all. Like, I learned so much, like you said, I gleaned so many skills from all of this time, and I feel like I'm way more efficient at setting up my lab and getting things running as a faculty member now than I would have been 4 or 5 years ago. Or 6 years ago. And so, you know, really just leveraging all of that to your advantage really does help. You know, I've helped so many students. Like, I have so much experience with grad students now that I hadn't had before. And it just makes it a lot easier to set up the lab. So, you know, wherever you find yourself on that spectrum, I wouldn't, you know, if you're starting out earlier, give yourself some grace if you're starting, because it takes time to get those mentoring skills and to learn how to deal with these, you know, when difficult situations come up. And if you're starting out a little later, don't beat yourself up about it. Just be like, you've already had that experience and you're learning, and you can now glean from it and use it to your advantage to move a little more quickly with some stuff because you have dealt with it before.
Yeah, so this is on the leadership skills. So can you mention any other skills that you acquired during your career?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is grant writing skills. We all need funding if we're going to be doing research, for our research to happen. And so, you know, the more practice you have in those kinds of skills is really helpful. Presentation skills, you know, really getting used to presenting to different types of audiences and how to tailor your talk, whether it's a lecture for a class or whether it's a research talk, you know, really how to tailor that talk to your audience. You know, those skills you just really grow a lot as you practice them and do them more. And all of those are very, very useful and interview skills. You know, interviewing can be really stressful and hard, and the more you do it, the more you learn from it. So like I mentioned, I had a few interviews where I was like, oh, that clearly wasn't the right answer. Like I should have said something else. And so, you know, okay, well, I didn't hear back from them, but that's okay, because I learned for the next interview that now I know what to say differently.
So you commented a bit on the grant writing skills. So I think grant writing, I think all of us experiences can be very disappointing, right? It's the chance that you get a grant is 10 to 20%. So I think it's more failure than success in general. So do you have any tips on this, tips or tricks?
You know what was one of the most interesting, I took a grant writing course when I was a postdoc at Duke from a guy who, it's like, what was it called? George Gopin, I think was his name. And it was called something like Writing from the Reader's Perspective. He's not a scientist, but he's done these seminars. And what that one was actually really helpful for me in a way that I didn't expect it to be. I consider myself a pretty good writer. I like you know, the science, we can come up with the science, but what he was really highlighting is how we write and like the structure of your writing and writing so that people can understand it. And so that's why he called it like writing from the reader's perspective. And he did this exercise where we like all read, I don't know, 2 sentences or something in this class. And then we all like voted on what we thought they meant. There was like multiple choice, and I was like reading the sentence like, oh, so clear that it means this, you know. And it was fascinating to see the audience and to see that like 25% of the audience thought it was choice A, 25% of the audience thought it meant choice B, 25 thought it meant choice C, 25%. And it's like, oh, we're reading the same sentences and we're all drawing very different conclusions. And so just really thinking about like your sentence structure and how you can write in a way to try to minimize that type of you know, disparate ideas about what the meaning was. That was really helpful for me. And I've used some of those tricks and techniques when I write. And that's not really the science, it doesn't help you on the science side, but just on the writing side. Yeah,
I think there's one more aspect that is very important also for transitioning to a faculty position is papers. So can you comment a bit on what is required? So how many first author, last author papers do you need? What is the H index? How many dollars on grants do you need to for this transition? Is there like an average number, or is this something? Can you tell us more about this?
I do think papers are important. I will say, at least in my experience with institutions here in the US, and I have not applied broadly, so I can't speak to institutions in other places, funding is even more important than publications. So they want you need publications to show that you have a record of productivity, but funding was even more significant. But for publications, I don't think you have to have that Cell Nature Science paper. They're great, but they're not as important as we think they are. Maybe some people might beg to differ with me, but if you have funding and you have a successful track record of other good publications, that should be sufficient. I've always heard the rule of like at least 2 publications from your postdoc. So I tried to kind of go with that idea of at least 2 publications from your postdoc, hopefully at least 2 from your graduate degree. But again, I don't know that the number of publications is quite as important as, are you at least publishing? And are you able to acquire funding?
Yeah, and any idea how much funding you need? How many $1 million is required before you can transition to such a position?
Yeah, it depends. But I do know that so I had a grant that was R01 type level funding, which is like a very high level of funding. And I know that there were other people with that level of funding who did not get interviews because there were just so many applicants who had so the more funding, the better. I don't know what else to say.
I think these are competing positions anyway, right? And it's also the way it is. So just moving back to the question list. So can you tell us a little bit about the different experience that you had for interviewing for your faculty position? So was it like a seminar, a teaching demonstration, a one-on-one interview, an interview with multiple people? Did you have several sessions? Was there only one session? So what was the structure of these kind of interviews?
Yes, to all of those, yes. All of those at different times and in different ways and in different, so yes, Definitely. I always found the teaching demonstration to be when I did those for some job interviews the most difficult, because I get talk about my research all the time. So for me, talking about the research was the easy part. I like teaching, but doing a teaching, that one takes a lot of time. Don't underestimate how much time that takes and how important it is to them. And so for those, I'd have to try to figure out like what textbook are they using? Like, so sometimes I did interviews at a few institutions where they're primary undergrad institutions, and they want you to give a lecture for their class. So you're teaching to the, you're actually giving a class session. And so for me, that was absolutely the most work, because I'm like having to go hunt down and try to find their textbook. And, oh, I haven't thought about like undergrad biochem in a long time. So then I'm trying to remember like, okay, what is this thing? Okay, yeah, how do I teach it? I mean, it just took a lot of work. So don't give yourself a lot of time to prepare that kind of stuff. So yes, sometimes I did that. Other interviews I did not. So like my position where I am right now, I did not have a teaching interview for this one because I'm in a school of medicine. And so I will teach in the class, but that'll be grad students and med students and stuff. So there wasn't an undergrad teaching component to this interview. Trying to think. A lot of places are doing, and I think especially with like the prevalence of Zoom, a lot of places are doing like these pre-screening interviews now, which are just a lot easier to do because of Zoom, because they don't have to like pay to fly you out there. So those are becoming a lot more common. Those are usually like a 30-minute interview, and they're usually with a committee of people. They were generally with a committee of faculty members, but I had like sometimes a large committee of like 10 people, sometimes a small committee of like 2 or 3 people. Sometimes there were students in those interviews. Often they were recorded and then they were shown to like more of the department after the interview. So those are becoming very common. They tend to ask like very basic kind of similar questions like, why are you interested in our institution? Like, why would you want to come here? What's your research vision? How would you fit in our department? What courses would you teach? What's your approach to mentoring? And then I would say like have like a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 10-year plan, because sometimes they ask you for a 1-year plan, sometimes they ask you for a 3-year plan, sometimes they ask for a 5-year plan, and sometimes they ask for a 10-year plan. So I would kind of have your like little quip of what you would say for each of those things ready. But yeah, those interviews are very common. And then then there's the actual interview, like the full interview. If you get invited for the full interview, then that's going to be like, if there's the teaching, then you'll do the teaching. That'll be definitely a research talk, often a chalk talk, and which is you and the faculty members with a chalkboard or via Zoom. I had to be creative about how to do it, because when you're doing that via Zoom. And then, your individual meetings one-on-one with all the faculty members. So I tried to be really prepared for those types of interviews. I would look up, like, who am I meeting with? And I would have read about, like, you can't like spend a crazy amount of time reading about each person's work, but I'd try to at least have some talking points. I had some talking points ready for each person that I was meeting with. Like, here's what I could talk to them about their research. Here's some questions that I could ask about their research. And then it's also good to just like, people like being asked questions. They like it when you ask for their advice. So I think that was a really good piece of advice I got when I attended a seminar like this, when I was looking for faculty jobs. And that advice was like, to just have some questions that you're ready to ask anybody, because when they ask you, do you have any questions, you don't want to just be sitting there like, oh, I don't have any. You don't want to say, no, I don't have any questions. Like, you want to have some questions, right? So one question that I think people really like is like, oh, well, what advice would you give a new faculty member starting out in this department? Everybody likes to be asked for their advice, and so I found that like a really easy question to ask.
Yeah, I think this is a very good tip. Ask questions yourself as well, because I think that means that you're curious and that you are interested in this particular position. So what did you do to prepare these interviews? So did you team up with a group of people, or did you ask previous lab members or your previous mentors? Or how did you prepare these kind of interviews?
Yes. I probably could have done more. The more you prepare, the better, probably. I felt very comfortable talking about my research and have done that so much. So I didn't really worry about the research talk. Obviously I practiced it, but I didn't worry as much about that. I was super stressed about the chalk talks for me, that was the most, like, also lecturing, I felt comfortable lecturing. I just had to, like I said, put a lot of time into it. But the chalk talks, that for me was like, I've never sat in a chalk talk before. Those are usually faculty only faculty and people interviewing. And so like, that was very intimidating to me. So what I did for that was I talked to a friend who had just gone through and successfully had interviewed a number of institutions and successfully gotten a faculty job like a year or two earlier. I talked to him like, hey, and now he had been on both sides of things, right? Like he had just gone through the process himself, and now he had been sitting on other people's chalk talks and seeing it from the other perspective. I asked him like, what did you do? You know, do you have any tips? What should I avoid? What should I do? And then I talked to somebody else, also like a mentor who had been a faculty member for years. Do you have any tips? And then I practiced it with several of my colleagues and got their advice. And so that was really helpful for me. That was definitely, so, you know, whatever component you're most concerned about or feel like you know the least about, definitely practice. It doesn't hurt to practice all of them, but sometimes, you know, it's exhausting, and there's just so much to prepare, and there's so many applications, there's only so much you can do. So for me, I focused on asking for help on the stuff that I knew I needed to practice, because I just didn't know how. I was less familiar with.
So, and then everything went successful. So you went through this whole procedure. You get the first interviews, then you get into the full interview, and then and then what does happen? So do they give you a particular offer, or is there like a negotiation process? How does this work?
Yeah, so either three things happen. You don't hear anything back, which happens a lot, and do not take it personally, because you will be shocked at how many things you just hear. Looks like your application or your interview just went into the nether, and it's just gone. It's in space. No one even, you know, gives you a second thought. So often you don't hear anything, or you get we really liked you, but we're sorry, we're going with another candidate, which at least is really nice to hear. Or you get usually they're going to call you. So if they're rejecting you, usually they will email you or just not do anything. If you are getting a phone call, or if you get an email saying, can we set up a time to have a phone call, that usually means you're probably going to get an offer, or at least it's good news. So that's always a good sign. So you get the offer, and then you start negotiating, which again looks different at every institution. But it is really important to negotiate and to really advocate for yourself. And, you know, I think what I had heard, you know, good advice I got on that from like much more established faculty members, when they, you know, like they were like, I'm always disappointed if somebody doesn't negotiate more, because it's my chance to give them more. And, you know, they can go to bat with you at the university, like they can sometimes ask the university for more that they wouldn't really be able to do if you didn't ask for it. So, you know, don't be afraid to say, hey, I've got an offer here and they're offering me this, like, can you guys do this? And sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. You know, there's also other things you can negotiate other than just salary. I think we always tend to think about salary, but there's other things you can negotiate. So like like the university needs to know how much money you're going to be spending during your time. So I had like initially a cap on how much they were going to let me spend during my first year. And I was like, I would really need that to be a little higher, because I'm going to have to do some big equipment purchases. And I don't think that we're going to be able to pay for everything if I'm at this level, you know? And so you can negotiate stuff like that, or you can say, this sounds really silly, but for me, one thing was like, I really like natural light, and the office space you're showing me like doesn't have a window, but it has a window that faces the window. Is there any way we can make the window that faces the window bigger? Which sounds really silly, but I'm sitting in the office that has that set up right now, and it makes me much, much happier, because I need to see daylight, and I'm just going to be miserable if I'm in a little hole of an office and I don't have any daylight. And that's something about me personally, right? So there's silly stuff like that, which like, don't be afraid to, you know, negotiate for different things that are different than just salary, because sometimes, you know, sometimes there's negotiation there, sometimes there's not, depending on the institution.
Yes. So and then you have your lab space, and so how do you decide to prioritize everything? So how much money goes to equipment, to salary costs, to the whatever, to your test tubes, to your things that you need for your experiments. So how do you decide these kind of things?
That is a great question, and it's really hard. And hopefully I'm doing it well. We'll find out soon. So I always tell people, I feel like it's like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I thought my computer was plugged in. It's not. So give me a second. It's about to die. Let me plug that in before that happens. I always tell people it's like running a small business. I feel like, you really are setting up a business and you have a budget and you have to think about how to really prioritize that budget and to pay for things well. For me, I had to think about, okay, what equipment do I absolutely need to run my lab? And, there was some equipment that going back into the negotiation stage, there was some equipment where I was like, I know I'm going to need this. That's expensive. I really don't want to buy that myself. Like, I don't really need my own. There were like 3 major pieces of equipment that I knew my lab needs to run. I'm going to put money from my startup funds to buy these 3 major pieces of equipment. But for these other pieces of equipment that I'm going to use like once a month, I really don't want to have to spend my own startup funds for that one piece of equipment. So, I negotiated in that like the department was going to buy that equipment. So, really planning ahead of time and to knowing what your equipment needs are so that you can negotiate stuff like that in so that you don't have to use, you don't have to buy all of them yourself, or you can find, I did research like when I was interviewing it, like, and then when getting offers, like, okay, so this place has, I see that this department has one of these pieces of equipment. Is there any way that I can use that one there and not have to buy my own, stuff like that. So you can really prioritize the equipment you're going to use the most that you think you want to spend your money on versus like saving some money there. And then, the great thing about setting up a lab is like not everywhere, but most places do new lab startup discounts and they're pretty great. So, really negotiating with companies and reps. And I always, even for like equipment, I did that a lot. So, just being patient and really taking time to negotiate. And if there was one piece of equipment that I really wanted versus another one, because this one had better like some bells and whistles I really liked, but something from another company came in a little bit lower, then I would go back to the other company and be like, hey, I really like your instrument, but so-and-so is offering me theirs for this price, like any movement here. And usually I could get, not always, but usually I could get them to come down and match the price. So, just spend the time to do a negotiation, because those like reagent prices, instrument prices, everything we buy for the lab, those prices are not set and they can give you discounts on all of them. And you get really good new lab discounts from most big vendors. And even if vendors don't have a new lab discount, I ask, I'm like, hey, I'm a new faculty member. I'm setting up a lab. I need to order a lot of stuff. Like, what can you do for me? And usually the reps want to help you. It's not always their decision. It's their manager's decision, but it really doesn't hurt to ask. So, you can save a lot of money that way. I really tried to prioritize that. And then I'm just keeping a really careful budget, like here's how much I'm spending and here's what I've spent. And just trying to be really, really aware of that.
And then you have your equipment and you have the lab and yourself, you're there. So, and then it's time to recruit some students. So how do you do this?
Yeah, so every institution is different. So it depends on how students come into your institution. So here at Hopkins, the students rotate. And so they do lab rotations through usually at least 3 different labs. And I actually found that people really wanted to rotate. So it was not difficult to get rotation students. In fact, I had to ask people like, I'm not like, you can start. I would love for you to rotate, but we don't have anything in the lab yet. So do you want to wait? Like, I don't want to waste your time. I got really lucky. I had some students rotate with me and they're great and they've already joined the lab. So I got 2 students really off the bat very quickly. Then again, I think it was just being aware of like what time-wise you want to commit, because it is time from you to train students in the lab. So like everybody has a different idea of like when they want to start. Like some people want to get all their equipment in and get everything set up before they let students in. For me, it was kind of actually really helpful to have more sets of hands in the lab to help me put things up, and I was very honest about it. Like, I'm not, I don't want to waste your time. So if you don't want to rotate while we're still setting up the lab, then I totally get it. It can be helpful to have other people around to help with stuff. And then, I'm trying to hire like someone who's just out of undergrad and before grad school, so we can get somebody in that position as well. So it's sort of a technician type role for the lab, to have some additional help. And then hopefully we'll get some postdocs soon, but that's on the horizon.
Great. So just kind of transitioning from that to your current research program, just of the mind of, say, anyone who's watching or anyone who may watch this when it's posted on the website, if they're interested in working with you, can you tell us a little bit about your current research programs and your staffing needs? So you mentioned a technician potentially, postdoc potentially. Are you taking graduate students? If they're not necessarily doing a rotation, like how does that work?
Yeah, so I have focused mostly on aptamers. So it's so great because I'm talking to an oligo group and I don't have to explain what those are, which is wonderful. So I do a lot of aptamer selection and aptamer biology and also aptamer chemistry. So we're doing a lot of fun selections against some novel targets. And then I'm working a lot on like, how can we really develop these aptamers to be therapeutics, and to be imaging agents to use for imaging. And so I'm focusing right now, most of my focus has been in the cancer space. So in terms of tumor targeting and tumor therapeutics, but I also have a number of projects that are coming up that are not cancer related. Without scooping those before we get those out, but yeah, so that's kind of what's going on here very generally. Absolutely do hope I get some good postdocs in the future. I have some funding. We're applying for a lot more funding, so we have projects to try to get off the ground. For those, people can email me. It's my first name, bethany.gray@jhmi.edu. So I think you can find me, I'm sure, through this stuff too. So don't be shy about contacting me if you have questions. I'm also happy to answer any questions if you have questions, or if I can help in any way, let me know. In terms of students, you have to, that application process goes to the university. So if students are accepted into the university, there's like a number of different programs, and I'm still learning about all of them because I'm new to this university. But there are a number of different programs. There's like a chemistry biology interface program. There's a I'm in the pharmacology department, so we have a pharmacology program, but there's like a lot of different programs that students can apply to and then rotate in labs.
Great, that's awesome. So as I was saying before we kind of got started, I also have experience with aptamers, and I can say that pretty much if you have an application, you can find an opportunity for an aptamer. So I imagine you're probably of a similar mind, and so students can probably, if they're interested in that technology, targeted delivery imaging, they can probably reach out to you for those, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so yeah, so you already shared how people can reach out to you by email. We can share that information as well. If people reach out to the info@oligonucleotidetherapeutics.org, we can connect you. Do you have a Twitter or like a LinkedIn where people can reach you?
That's a great question. Yes, I do. And I just changed my Twitter handle, so I should know it off the top of my head. I'm like, I'm going to have to double check it so I don't get confused.
That's okay.
But it's at Powell Gray Lab. So at Powell, Powell Gray, Gray Lab. And that's my lab's Twitter. So absolutely. I have LinkedIn as well, Bethany Powell Gray. I'm on LinkedIn. It should be pretty easy to find me with my full name there. I don't check LinkedIn quite as often as I should. So you'll probably get a better response on Twitter or on my email, but I do look at LinkedIn periodically, just not as regularly.
Awesome. Okay, so we're almost at the hour. So just to wrap up, I'll give you the option to answer two different kind of questions. So the first question being, were there any unexpected challenges that you had setting up your lab that you would like to give some advice about, or some cautionary tale about maybe, that could make things easier for others? Or do you just have any general advice for trainees who are interested in pursuing kind of the traditional trajectory from postdoc to faculty or postdoc to research scientist to faculty kind of situation?
I can answer both very quickly, probably. For general advice, I would just say to really just be intentional about what different experiences you do if that's your goal. So, like I knew I wasn't going to have this traditional teaching resume. So I sought out opportunities as a postdoc to add some kind of pad my resume there, because I knew that I was going to be a little bit shy in that form. And then the other thing is, just kind of keep an open mind, because your vision for what your job as an academic, like what you think you want to do as an academic, may be different from what you actually want to do for an academic. So, I started interviewing at jobs, and I like what I had visioned for myself as a position. I'm interviewing and I'm thinking, actually, I don't want to do this. Like, I actually want this type of position. So, so I think it's sometimes those interview processes can be a learning process too, where you can go and so that it's always good to keep an open mind and to realize that. In terms of things like setup stuff, man, it is just a hard time to be setting up a lab because of the pandemic and everything is taking forever. So
Yeah.
I am not going to have tissue culture incubators till October, and I ordered them in February. Just be prepared. Hopefully supply chain stuff will be getting a little bit better, but any equipment that you need to order it like as soon as you can, because it is just going to take a long time. And there's certain pieces of equipment that I can borrow from other labs. Like, I think other people have tissue culture incubators, so thankfully I have some nice neighbors who will let me use theirs until we have our own. But then there's some things that like I really like. I bought an oligosynthesizer. Nobody else in the department has one of those. It's being set up right now. Actually, today's a very exciting day. I feel like it's Christmas in the lab because our equipment is finally all getting here, a lot of it. And so, just gonna have to be patient. And so the sooner you can, and so maybe be prepared with some projects you can get off the ground running that don't require your bigger pieces of equipment, because it's probably going to be a little while before you have them. So yeah,
that's great advice. Did you find yourself in a situation where you pivoted to something because you were waiting on equipment?
I definitely have been very stressed about some stuff, some grant stuff that I need to get done. But so I think just being very honest with talking to the program manager for the grant and just being very honest about stuff, it put me at peace. I was very stressed. How are we going to get this done? I don't have the equipment. Like, I can't do it right now because we don't even have the equipment. But just, thankfully, at least everybody seems to understand, because we have all dealt with COVID supply chain issues. And so just really reaching out to people and telling them what's going on and being proactive about explaining that, I think is a really good idea. And then you'll feel less stressed afterwards. And I was like, oh, I should have talked to them earlier. And then I would be not freaking out about this quite as much. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I think that's good advice in general. You should talk to people before you start freaking out.
Yes.
I think that's pretty widely applicable.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome.
It is very true.
Well, this has already brought us to noon. So that'll be the end of our time together. We want to thank you again so much for having this very candid and open conversation with us about your transition from graduate school into postdoc research scientist into faculty. And as you said, if people want to reach out to you, they can go through Twitter at Powell Gray Lab, or they can reach out to us and we can help connect you. So we just want to thank you again. And remember to kind of share this with your colleagues and your networks for people who are also interested in this process, and check out the OTS website for upcoming webinars.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking to you guys.
Great, thank you.